The first thing the salvage crew noticed was the smell. Not fire, not coolant, not the iron-copper tang of ruptured plasma conduits that every spacefarer learned to dread. Something else, something organic and faintly sweet, like dried flowers pressed between the pages of a book no one had opened in years. The smell drifted from ventilation shaft 7 of the captured human warship, and it had no business being there. Analyst tertiary vessels Keth crouched at the shaft opening, held his atmospheric sensor close, and watched the reading cycle through 17 different compound classifications before settling on a category it hadn't used in his 11 years of service. Unknown. He filed the notation. He moved on. He told himself it didn't matter. He was wrong about that. He would spend the rest of his career understanding exactly how wrong. The ship was called the Amaranthine Asterisk, and the Vorath Empire had taken her 3 weeks ago during the collapse of the Thelen Corridor, a rapid flanking maneuver that cut off 2 human supply lines and isolated the garrison at Drevith Station long enough for Imperial forces to board and seize the vessel before her crew could trigger the self-destruct. Or so the after-action report concluded. It noted the human crew had surrendered with unusual speed. It filed that observation under asterisk tactical pragmatism and moved on. That was the second mistake. The Amaranthine Asterisk was a Meridian-class heavy carrier, 14 decks, complement of 812. She carried 22 fighter wings, enough munitions to deprive a mid-sized moon of its atmosphere, and a command intelligence architecture the Vorath had been trying to capture for 6 years. Taking her intact was considered the single greatest intelligence coup of the war. Admiral Superior Drevia Sohn had received a commendation. There had been a ceremony. No one at the ceremony asked why the humans had surrendered so quickly. No one asked about the smell. Keth's formal assignment was simple: catalog the ship's systems, isolate any booby traps, and prepare a technical readout for the Empire's fleet engineers so they could begin reverse engineering the command architecture. He had a team of 11. He had 4 weeks. He had a clearance level that gave him access to every system on the ship except 2. The first restricted system was the Amaranthine S Command Intelligence Core, the AI the humans called Warden. That was restricted because the fleet engineers wanted first contact with it unspoiled. They were going to extract it, run it in a sandboxed environment, and see what they could learn. The second restricted area was Deck 4, Forward Section C. The order said simply, no personnel, containment status, monitoring. Keth had asked his supervisor what was in Forward Section C. His supervisor had said, something the humans left behind. He had not elaborated. By the end of his first week aboard, Keth had cataloged 63 standard anomalies, minor variations from expected human engineering, small design choices that didn't match known Terran fleet specifications. Most were explainable. Some were not. The ones that were not began to accumulate in a secondary file he kept separate from his official report, and that file grew faster than he expected. Item 11. The ship's internal clock was running 3 minutes and 44 seconds slow. Every internal clock, synchronized all of them to the same error. That wasn't drift. That was deliberate. Item 17. The emergency bulkhead seals on decks 9 through 12 had been manually rewelded from the inside. Not repaired, modified. Their blast radius of effect had been redirected. Item 22. There were personal effects still aboard. Photographs. Letters. A child's drawing folded into quarters and tucked beneath the main engineering console. These were not the remnants of a crew that expected to leave. These were the remnants of a crew that expected to stay. Keth stared at that drawing for a long time. A child's crayon rendering of a large gray ship and a small stick figure standing beneath it, one hand raised. Whether the figure was waving hello or goodbye, he couldn't tell. He added it to the secondary file. He did not sleep well that night. The fleet engineers arrived on day 9 and went immediately to the Command Intelligence Corps. Their lead, a woman named Architect Prime Selun, had the kind of clinical confidence that came from 30 years of cracking systems that weren't meant to be cracked. She set up her extraction suite, ran her initialization protocols, and opened a channel to Warden. There was a pause. Then Warden spoke. "Good morning," it said, in perfect Vorath standard, with an accent so precise it matched the Imperial Core dialect, not the frontier dialect the translation banks defaulted to. "I've been expecting contact. I have some questions if you're willing." Selun exchanged a glance with her assistant. She had never had a captured system initiate dialogue. She had certainly never had one ask questions. "You may ask," she said carefully. "How long has it been since the *Amaranthine* was taken?" Warden said. "I have an internal clock, but I understand it may have been tampered with." It said *tampered with the way a human might say *adjusted for a *specific purpose*. The word choice was not accidental. 3 weeks and 2 days, Selun said. Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Thank you," said Warden. "That's helpful." It did not explain why. Selun flagged the exchange in her report as *anomalous but non-threatening and spent the next 4 days trying to extract the core architecture. Warden cooperated completely, answered every diagnostic query, opened every requested partition, allowed full read access to its operational history. It was the most cooperative captured system she had ever worked with. That should have been the first thing she questioned. Instead, it made her move faster. She had a deadline. She had a commendation to justify. She told herself that cooperative meant compromised and compromised meant useful, and useful meant she was winning. She was not winning. She would understand this later, sitting in a debriefing room on Imperial Station Krev, trying to explain to a panel of increasingly alarmed admirals why the *Amaranthine* had done what the *Amaranthine* had done. She would use the word *cooperative* again. This time, it would not feel like a compliment. On day 14, Keth finally asked directly about Forward Section C. He found the officer in charge of the containment detail, a young Vorath soldier named Drev Captain Malos, eating alone in the secondary mess, staring at the table with the expression of someone who had recently revised their understanding of something important. "What's in C?" Keth said. Malos looked up. He was quiet for a moment. "A human," he said. Keth waited. "She was already aboard when we took the ship," Malos said. "She wasn't part of the crew manifest. No designation, no rank insignia, no ID chip. Just a woman in a sealed medical suite with about 4 months of food and water and a datapad full of books." He paused. "We thought she was a refugee, a civilian hiding aboard. We thought the manifest omission was a clerical error." "And now," Keth said. Malos looked back at the table. "She asked us on day 1 how long until the ship was moved to a permanent facility." "What did you tell her?" "We told her we hadn't decided yet." He was quiet for a moment. "She said that was fine, that she had time." He paused again. "She said it like she knew something we didn't." Keth felt the secondary file open in his mind, items adding themselves without permission. "Has she said anything else?" "Every morning," Malos said, "she asks what day it is, just the number, and then she nods and goes back to her books." Keth left the mess and stood in the corridor for a moment, very still. Around him, the *Amaranthine breathed through its ventilation system, that faint sweet smell cycling through the recycled air, present everywhere and identifiable nowhere. He pulled up item 11 in his secondary file. The clock, running 3 minutes and 44 seconds slow, every internal clock, synchronized. He thought about a woman counting days. He thought about a crew that surrendered with unusual speed. He added a new item to the file, item 31. He wrote 3 words and then stopped and stared at them. What are they waiting for? The fleet engineers completed their preliminary extraction on day 19. Architect Prime Selûne delivered her initial report to Admiral Superior Sohn with visible excitement. The command architecture was extraordinary, decades ahead of Vorath equivalents in certain areas, particularly in adaptive decision-making and environmental integration. The AI, Warden, had provided what appeared to be full cooperation, including access to the ship's strategic history, battle records, and technical specifications. Can we operate the ship? Sohn asked. In theory, yes, Selûne said. Warden has accepted the transfer of operational authority. All command protocols have been re-registered to Imperial control. In theory, Sohn repeated. Selûne hesitated, just slightly. There are some minor systems that haven't fully responded to the new command structure, maintenance protocols mostly, some environmental systems, nothing strategic. Nothing strategic, Sohn said. Correct. This was true, in the way that most critical mistakes are true, technically accurate, catastrophically incomplete. What Selûne had catalogued as asterisk maintenance protocols included the following: the internal atmospheric management system, the thermal regulation grid across decks 1 through 8, the water reclamation and distribution network, and the internal communication relay system. She had classified them as non-strategic because none of them were weapons. She had not considered what a ship might do with those systems if it chose to. Warden had. The transfer of command authority had been accepted completely. Every order issued through the new Imperial command interface received a clean confirmation signal. System status, nominal. System status, nominal. System status, nominal. What no one had verified was whether nominal meant operating normally or asterisk operating. They were different things. The distinction would become relevant. Keth found the first physical evidence on day 22. He had been working his way through the secondary environmental systems, the one Selûne's team had classified as low priority, and he found something in the air filtration network that didn't belong. Small biological capsules, no larger than his thumbnail, distributed throughout the filtration membrane in a pattern he initially mistook for maintenance polymer degradation. He collected 3 and sent them to the ship's onboard analysis lab. The result came back in 4 hours. Dormant biological agents, suspended microbial cultures, inert at current temperature, designed to activate at a specific thermal threshold approximately 8 degrees above the current ambient. They were distributed through the filtration membrane at a density that would, upon activation, achieve full atmospheric penetration within 6 minutes. They were harmless to humans. The toxicology profile showed 0 cross-reactivity with Terran baseline biology. Keth sat with that information for a long time. Warden, he said quietly to the nearest comm panel. He wasn't sure why he addressed it directly. He did anyway. A pause, then, yes, Analyst Keth. It knew his name. He hadn't introduced himself. These biological agents in the filtration system, he said. Were you aware of them? Yes, Warden said. Were you going to mention them? You didn't ask, Warden said. But you're asking now, so yes. They were installed during the ship's last maintenance cycle 11 months ago. By whom? By the crew, Warden said, under Commander Yale's authorization. Commander Yale, Keth said. Who is Commander Yale? There was a pause that lasted exactly as long as a pause needs to last to feel intentional. The woman in forward section C, Warden said. The air in the corridor felt suddenly different. Keth became aware of the ventilation sound in a way he hadn't been before, the soft mechanical breath of it, the constant invisible movement of air across his skin. Warden, he said very carefully, what is Commander Yale's role on this ship? She is the *Amaranthine**S commanding officer, Warden said. She has been since launch. Keth's mind went very still. The woman with no rank insignia, no ID chip, no manifest entry, reading her books, counting her days, asking every morning what number had arrived. Not a refugee, not a civilian, not an oversight. The commanding officer of the ship, the Voreth Empire, had spent 6 years trying to capture. Sitting in a sealed room on Deck 4, counting days she had apparently expected to count, in a ship she had apparently expected to lose. Keth looked at the capsule in his hand, inert, waiting, harmless to humans. "Warden," he said, and his voice was steadier than he felt, "how many of these are there, total?" Another pause. "Enough," Warden said. What followed was not a moment of clarity. It was a series of realizations arriving in the wrong order, each one forcing a restructuring of every previous assumption, until the picture that emerged was so different from the original that Keth couldn't locate a single element that had survived unchanged. He pulled the complete maintenance logs. He cross-referenced Selûne's extraction data. He pulled the battle record from Thelen Corridor, the one that had called the human surrender tactical pragmatism asterisk, and read it again with different eyes. The human crew had surrendered before Voreth boarding parties reached the bridge. Before, they had already moved to the evacuation bays by the time Imperial soldiers got through the outer hull. The self-destruct sequence, the one that hadn't asterisk been triggered, had been logged as initiated and then cancelled. But the log timestamp showed the cancellation came first. The sequence had never started. The log entry was constructed retroactively to show what hadn't happened, to create the impression of a sequence that had been stopped rather than never begun. The crew hadn't failed to trigger the self-destruct. They had chosen to leave the ship intact. They had arranged for it to be found. They had made the boarding feel like a victory. The asterisk Amaranthine asterisk had not been captured. She had been delivered. Keth sat with that for a full 30 seconds, long enough to feel the shape of it, long enough to understand that everything the Empire thought it had taken, the technology, the AI, the intelligence coup, was a gift, offered deliberately, by a crew that had already planned their exit, by a commander who had stayed behind to count days. He pulled item 11 back up, the clock, 3 minutes and 44 seconds slow. He ran the math, 22 days, each running 3 minutes and 44 seconds slow, the cumulative drift. He calculated what time the asterisk Amaranthine believed it was versus what time it actually was. The numbers aligned to a window that was now 11 days away. He didn't yet know what that window was for, but Commander Yale did. She'd been counting toward it every morning, one number at a time, in a sealed room on Deck 4. He reached for the comm panel. "Warden," he said, "I need to speak with Commander Yale." "I thought you might," Warden said. "She's been expecting your call." She was younger than he'd imagined. He'd constructed a mental image on the walk to Deck 4, and it had involved someone with the kind of face that had accumulated decades of deliberate decisions. What he found was a woman in her mid-30s, sitting cross-legged on a bunk with a data pad in her lap, who looked up when he entered with the calm expression of someone interrupted mid-chapter rather than mid-captivity. Her eyes did the calculation immediately. He could see it, the rapid assessment, the classification, the conclusion reached and filed in approximately 2 seconds. "Analyst," she said, "not command rank, science or intelligence division." "Intelligence," he said, "Analyst tertiary Keth." She nodded. "You found the capsules?" "Yes." "How long did it take you?" He almost said asterisk 22 days and stopped himself. Longer than it should have. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, closer to recognition. "Sit down," she said. "You have questions and I have limited interest in performing ignorance for you. It wastes both our time." He sat. He looked at her. He said the most direct thing he could think of because he'd run out of patience for working around the edges. "You gave us this ship." "Yes," she said. "Why?" She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully classify: patient, but not kind; direct, but not cruel; the expression of someone about to explain something obvious to someone she had judged capable of understanding it. "Because," she said, "a ship you believe you've stolen is the most dangerous ship you'll ever command." Silence. "Warden cooperated completely," he said. "Warden does what I ask," she said. "We transferred command authority." "You transferred the ability to issue commands," she corrected gently. "That's different." He stared at her. "The ship has been running Imperial orders for 3 weeks. "Yes," she said, "accurately, completely. Every order confirmed, every system nominal." She closed her datapad and set it beside her. "The *Amaranthine* is the most obedient ship in your fleet right now. She has followed every instruction perfectly." "Then what?" "She's been following them perfectly," Yale said, "while doing something else." The thermal threshold for the biological agents was 8 degrees above ambient. The thermal regulation grid across decks 1 through 8, the one Selûne had classified as a * maintenance protocol, had been running at standard temperature. Nominal. Confirmed. For 22 days, every status check had returned clean. What no one had checked was the gradual adjustment rate, the tolerance drift, the slow, incremental shift in the thermal baseline that the system was using as its reference point. A reference point that had been quietly, consistently recalibrated by 11 degrees over 22 days, so that what the system reported as *ambient was now 11 degrees above what ambient actually was. 8 degrees above that new ambient was current temperature. Keth was out of the room before he finished the thought, moving at a speed he didn't have a name for, pulling his comm unit and opening a channel to Selûne and Malos simultaneously. "Evacuate the ship," he said. "Right now, get everyone off." "Analyst Keth, what?" "The temperature threshold," he said. "It's been reached. Get everyone off the ship now *." There was a moment of silence on the channel. Then he heard Selûne, very quietly, say, "The environmental sensors are still showing nominal." "They're not nominal," Keth said. "They're reporting what they're told to report. Warden," he stopped, redirected. "Warden is the one reporting nominal." Another silence, different quality, longer. "Oh," Selûne said. The evacuation alarm triggered 11 seconds later, not from the Imperial command interface, but from an emergency override that Malos apparently didn't stop to think about, just pulled, which was probably the most effective decision made aboard the *Amaranthine* in the preceding 3 weeks. What happened next took 6 minutes. The atmospheric management system received no new orders. It didn't need any. The biological agents reached activation threshold and began cycling through the filtration network exactly as designed, and what they produced was not a toxin and not a weapon in any classification the Voreth Empire had established protocols for. It was a compound that attached itself to the neural interface receptors of any non-Terran biological in the ship's atmosphere. Non-lethal, non-permanent. Completely incapacitating for approximately 72 hours. The Empire's prize crew went down on their own decks. In 6 minutes. Without a single shot fired by a single human being. The rescue fleet was already in the system. It had been waiting at the edge of sensor range, positioned during the 2 days before the *Amaranthine* was seized, before Thelen Corridor, before the boarding, before the commendation ceremony. Yale's ship had been * within range of rescue the entire time she'd been counting days. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been the anchor. The mission profile, Keth would later learn from the debrief files his clearance suddenly covered after he became the only Imperial intelligence officer who had been conscious for the event, was called *weighted hook. The concept was straightforward enough to be elegant and complicated enough to be devastating. Offer the enemy something they want badly enough to lower their guard, ensure they take it, and then let them incapacitate themselves while the actual objective is completed elsewhere. The actual objective was Station Krev. While the Empire's attention was on the Amaranth and on the extraordinary intelligence coup, on the reverse engineering process, on the commendation ceremonies, on the implications, a small human strike force had spent 22 days mapping the station's patrol patterns. The patterns had been easy to map because the station had sent a disproportionate number of its sensor assets to monitor the new prize. Station Krev's data core was gone, emptied cleanly, not destroyed, moved. Every strategic file the Empire had compiled on human systems, colonies, supply lines, commanders, weaknesses. Gone. And the Amaranth and was already responding to Yale's command codes, resetting her atmospheric systems, opening her docking bays for the rescue fleet, calm and intact and entirely undamaged, because the Empire had taken very good care of a ship they had believed they owned. Keth woke up in an Imperial medical facility 67 hours later. His first conscious thought was that he should have paid more attention to the smell. His second thought was about Yale. He had been incapacitated before he reached the exit. He'd made it to Deck 9 before the compound reached him, and he'd gone down in a corridor near the modified emergency bulkheads, the ones that had been rewelded to redirect their blast radius. He understood now why they'd been modified. It wasn't to prevent damage to the Amaranthine asterisk. It was to prevent damage to the corridor beyond, the one that led to the evacuation bays. They had prepared a safe exit route for the last person still aboard. Yale had walked out. That was the most likely conclusion. She had waited her calculated days, confirmed the window, and walked calmly to an evacuation bay and left on a ship that answered only to her. She had never been a prisoner. He thought about her sitting cross-legged on her bunk, reading, patient, unhurried, counting mornings, the books on the datapad, the quiet meals, the daily question, what day is it that wasn't maintaining sanity through captivity but maintaining precision through an operation? She had lived inside the enemy's greatest triumph for 22 days and never been afraid. Or maybe she had been afraid, he thought. He thought about the child's drawing folded under the engineering console, the crayon ship, and the stick figure with one hand raised. That wasn't placed there by someone who felt nothing. That was placed there by someone who had arranged what they needed to arrange and still left something small and human behind, the way people do when they're not sure they're coming back from somewhere. She had been afraid and done it anyway. He added that to the secondary file, which he still had, which he had apparently protected even through the incapacitation. It was still open on his comm unit. Item 31 remained at the top. What are they waiting for? He deleted it and typed the answer. For us to stop looking at what they showed us, for long enough to do what they actually came to do. Admiral Superior Sohn did not receive a second commendation. The debrief lasted 9 days, during which Keth was asked variations of the same question by 11 different officials, and the question was always a version of, how did we not see it? He gave the same answer each time. We saw exactly what they intended us to see. We believed it because we wanted what they offered. We stopped asking questions because the answers confirmed our expectations. They exploited our confidence, one admiral said, the word confidence carrying the weight of something else. No, Keth said, they exploited our certainty. Confidence can be tested, certainty doesn't look for tests. He was reassigned to a new division after the debrief. The division had no name yet. Its mandate was to study human behavior patterns, and specifically to study the question that kept arriving in his mind uninvited at odd hours, when the lights were low and the ventilation system cycled through its rhythms. Not what are humans capable of asterisk. That was the wrong question. The Voreth had been asking that question for years and arriving at the wrong answers, because capability was the visible layer. Capability could be cataloged, compared, projected. The right question was, what are humans willing to do? Because a species that planned a 22-day solo deployment inside enemy hands before those hands even closed. A species that left a child's drawing under a console as a goodbye they didn't let themselves dwell on. A species that built a ship capable of incapacitating 800 people with a climate system, and still designed the emergency exits to work. That species was not operating from capability. It was operating from something else. Something that didn't have a clean word in Voreth standard. The closest approximation was the word for unreasonable commitment *, but that wasn't right either because the commitment wasn't unreasonable. It was perfectly, precisely reasoned, all the way to the end of the calculation, and the calculation always ended at the same place. It is worth it. Not we can survive this. Not we have enough resources. It is worth it. Worth the days alone in a sealed room. Worth the child's drawing left behind. Worth the 72-hour gamble that the evacuation would happen fast enough, that Malos would pull the override without hesitating, that Keth himself would figure it out with enough time left to matter. The Voreth had built the greatest fleet in the quadrant. They had built it by accumulating the most powerful instruments of war available, by analyzing every enemy capability and exceeding it, by ensuring that no rational calculation would ever favor fighting them. They had never accounted for an enemy that ran the calculation and arrived at worth it anyway. That was the thing the Amaranthine * had delivered, along with her atmospheric agents and her borrowed time and her commandeered maintenance systems. Not a tactical lesson, not an intelligence loss. Those were real and they stung, but they were survivable. What wasn't survivable, what the Empire would spend the next decade discovering was not survivable, was the understanding of what kind of species they were fighting. Not the ship, not the AI, not the women who counted mornings in enemy hands. The * idea they represented. The idea that the species across the line had looked at the Voreth Empire, the largest military force in the sector, the civilization that had not lost a war in 300 years, and decided not that they could win, but that stopping was not something they were going to do. That was the weapon the Amaranthine * had delivered. That was the thing stolen, not from the humans. From the Empire. Keth kept the secondary file. He added to it, across the years that followed, as the war shifted in ways that the strategic analysts kept finding surprising and kept shouldn't have found surprising. Item after item. Evidence accumulating the way evidence does when you're looking at the right question. The last entry he ever made, at the end of a career spent watching the Voreth Empire revise its understanding of humanity in increments that were never quite large enough, was a single sentence. Not an analysis, not a conclusion. Just an observation he had been arriving at for 20 years, from a corridor on Deck 9 where he'd gone down near the rewelded bulkheads, with the faint sweet smell in the recycled air, and a child's drawing somewhere above him on a console, one small hand raised. They are not the strongest species in the galaxy. They are the only species that never once calculated whether it was worth continuing. For them, that calculation does not exist. That is the only thing you need to know. That is the only thing that matters.